Hi, this is Roberto. I'm a 6th degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and today I'm going to be answering some questions from some of my students. Here's a question from Nikal. Thoughts on Ghee versus no Ghee? When I started training, it was always said that if you train in Ghee, that no Ghee grappling is much easier. I personally think they're very different. You find fighting in the Ghee is harder than no Ghee, or vice versa. I actually get asked that question quite a lot, and my thoughts are that the Ghee can be very beneficial in training as long as you use it correctly. And what I mean by that is that you don't want to rely on the Ghee as some sort of tool. If you're using the Ghee offensively while training, for example, you're excessively using Ghee chokes, or you're wrapping the lapel around a person's arm or even leg, then you're using the Ghee as a weapon more than what it's meant to be, in my opinion, which is a handicap. So the idea when I train in the Ghee, and I recommend my students to train with the Ghee on, is that it's going to be harder for you to use sheer athleticism to escape certain moves. So Jiu-Jitsu, while you're learning it, is a matter of number of mistakes. So in order to get to a certain level, you have to commit a really big number of mistakes. Let's say 10,000 mistakes. While without the Ghee, at times you get, escape out of situations that are bad. For example, I left my neck open. My opponent caught me in a guillotine, but because I'm slippery, I'm going to pop my head out. While a lot of people will see that as a great opportunity, well, I escaped a choke, I see that as an opportunity missed. You should have learned that that kind of mistake, exposing your neck, usually results in getting tapped. But because you're athletic, because you're sweaty, because you have cropped hair on the sides, you ended up escaping and not learning that lesson. Training really isn't about winning. Training, it's about learning. So the faster you get tapped, the better you're going to get. So the good training session is not the session that you barely got tapped, but it's the session that you barely survived. And the Ghee will help with that. There's something very claustrophobic about the Ghee, especially in warm weather. It's hard to breathe with that thing on. It's hard to move. It gets very hot. But if you learn to use it in the way it's intended to be, in my opinion, which is a tool to make things harder, when it comes to no Ghee, you're going to do better. I see a lot of people say, well, why not just train in no Ghee? When I get asked that, I believe it's the same as, okay, I want to excel at the 100-meter sprint, so I'm just going to run and sprint 100 meters. That's not the case if you're a serious athlete doing that kind of athletic performance. You're going to be lifting heavy weights, you're going to be training in plyometrics, you're going to be using hurdles, you're going to be doing a little longer distance stuff. So you have to supplement your training to maximize the results in a certain event. And the same is with Jiu-Jitsu. While it's great to train in no Ghee, and every once in a while I highly recommend that you even add open hand strikes to that so that you can keep your Jiu-Jitsu honest, it is my really my perception that Jiu-Jitsu can be done and can be learned faster with the Ghee, just because it's going to really augment the number of times you're going to find yourself in trouble and learn from it. Evan asks, who is the MMA and Jiu-Jitsu GOAT, and who's the best person I've trained with or fought? When it comes to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I'm old school, and I have to say, therefore, Rickson Gracie. I think the things that he has done, not only in competition, but I have spoken to people that have trained with him and competed against him. It's something actually, incredible, almost surreal. When it comes to modern times, undoubtedly, the person that's doing the most impact nowadays in competition is Gordon Ryan. When it comes to mixed martial arts, it's very hard to pinpoint one. Every weight division is a little different. There's a great case to be made for Khabib. There's a great case to be made for Demetrius Johnson. Good case to be made for Georges St. Pierre. There's a lot of talented people out there, and it depends. It depends on what you're gonna use as a criteria. As far as people that I have trained with, fought against, I would say Jiu-Jitsu wise, which is easier to pinpoint. I think the hardest guy I've ever trained with was a guy named Gigi Paiva, Alexandre Paiva, his full name. And Gigi had a very interesting game, very unique to him. I was a purple belt at the time. He was a black belt. And I gotta say, I couldn't do much to the guy. He was very good in his defense and had certain positions that were very unique to his game, and he was excellent at Jiu-Jitsu. It was a well-known fact at the gym that his performance in competition did not even translate to how good he was inside the gym. For MMA, I had the opportunity to train and fight against some high prospects and UFC veterans. I've trained with Matt Hughes. I've fought against Travis Fulton, who at the time was the guy who had the most MMA fights in history. I fought against Aaron Riley, who ended up in the UFC. So I had a short but good career. Evan asks, would you rather be faster or stronger than your opponent with the same technique level? That's a personal question, as in, it depends on what your technique relies the most on. In my case, I prefer speed over strength. I'd rather have both. I'd rather be stronger and faster than my opponent, but if I could pick one, I would pick speed. That's just because my game is not really a slow game, it's a faster game, so I want to excel in that. Ali asks, how to increase conditioning for Jiu-Jitsu? That's another question I get asked a lot. So Jiu-Jitsu is very unique when it comes to its demands on the body, and just being a regular good athlete just doesn't cut it. The best thing without question is to do as much Jiu-Jitsu as possible, to spar as much as possible. Not just because Jiu-Jitsu is a blend of anaerobic and aerobic that's extremely hard to mimic outside of the gym, but also because a lot of your conditioning in Jiu-Jitsu relies on you being able to relax and breathe during a sparring session. So I would start there, try to make it a class as much as possible and try to spar as much as possible. But there are things you can do outside of the gym that will help a lot. First of all, get good physical preparedness, so GPP. Develop a good base when it comes to conditioning. That can be achieved easily with any kind of regular strength regimen. So add some compound lifts, do some body weight exercises, and you're going to be in there. But Jiu-Jitsu asks more of your body, and there are three things that usually people don't train that are very important in Jiu-Jitsu. First of all is neck strength. There's a reason why you don't see a lot of people that have done Jiu-Jitsu for years with pencil necks. So try to incorporate, obviously to your limits, some kind of programming where you're going to strengthen your neck, because neck strengthening is not only about being able to resist and prevent chokes from happening, but also about maintaining your spine in alignment, which is huge in Jiu-Jitsu while performing technique. The next thing you want to work on is your grip strength. Grip strength is something that's extremely important in Jiu-Jitsu, because without that you cannot transfer your power, the power that you've worked hard in the gym to develop, to your opponent. So I always say that if you have a lot of power but you don't have a strong grip, it's going to be like that Ferrari on ice with slick tires. That power is not going to be able to transfer. Okay, so what you really want is to be able to transfer whatever you have developed when it comes to strength to your opponent, and by that you need to rely on a strong grip. The last but not least, it's a strong core, and while everybody will do sit-ups here and there, Jiu-Jitsu involves a lot of core strength, more than most people realize. When you're pushing against somebody, say from the bottom position, while you're sitting up in maybe butterfly guard, the limit of how much you can push is not how much you can bench press, because when you're bench pressing, you're being supported on your back by a flat bench. Inside guard, the only thing that's supporting you is your core holding that position. So what will fail first will most likely be the core. In order to guarantee that it won't fail too soon, you got to develop a strong core so you can play, especially from the bottom, effectively. Why do I think people drop off after blue belt? So this is usually called the blue belt blues, and what it is that your learning curve as a total beginner in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is exponential. So you're going to come from a place of total ignorance to basic understanding of the rules and basic understanding of the mechanics and tactics of ground fighting in a very short period of time. And that causes you to be extremely excited about it, because after all, everything that's usually an instinct on the ground, it will be wrong. Say pushing your opponent away and extending your arms, sticking your neck out to maintain balance. All those things are things that the lay person is going to do quite frequently once they start, and they will be able to filter that out in the first, say, 6 months to a year of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But when they get to that coveted blue belt level, a lot of people will quit right after getting that first promotion. Why is that? Well, your mind is used to that rewarding sensation that every time you come to class, your jiu-jitsu knowledge improves 10%. Of course, it improves that much when your knowledge is that small. But it's only a reality that as you get better at jiu-jitsu, the percentage of increase of every single training session will diminish. And that change of the slope of the curve from exponential to a little bit of a slope, it's still going up, but it's not going up at the same level, at the same rate. And a lot of people cannot take that lesser reward. So if they don't have that sensation, oh, I feel like I'm not making as much progress. No, that's very untrue. You're making the progress you should be making at that level. It is just never going to be able to be as impressive in your mind or as exponential as your first months of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So you have to learn how to cope with that, and you have to understand that if every day of your life you get in there and you get 1% or 0.5% better on the mats on that day, it's a pretty damn good day, because that accumulates, and in a period of 10 years you would have improved a ton. So hang in there. If you just received your blue belt, don't quit, because everybody at one time or another feels bad about their jiu-jitsu and believes, oh man, I'm not making any improvement. Jiu-jitsu is a game. It's not really a game of who's more talented. It's not a game of who's more flexible or who's stronger. It's really a game of who's left. So you don't want to be that person that just because you ran into a little problem along the way, you're going to quit. Stick with it. It's going to pay off. What are the top qualities of a successful jiu-jitsu athlete? When it comes to athleticism in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I say it's very hard to get a balance of all the things, because of course you have to be strong, you have to be powerful. So absolute strength and explosiveness will play a part. But at the same time, you need to be flexible, you need to be fast, and you need to have good cardio. So those are the 5 physical attributes. The problem with that is that every time you start training your strength, you're going to lose a little bit of flexibility. You train your cardio, your strength will go down. You train your flexibility, you might lose a little bit of that explosiveness. So it's really hard to find a perfect balance where everything goes up at the same time. It is possible, but eventually you're going to have to prioritize exactly what you want your number 1 physical attribute to be. And that should match the nature of your game. So you should start there. Is my game a pressure game? Is my game a game that requires speed? Is my game, am I a bottom player that requires a lot of flexibility so I can finesse my jiu-jitsu against stronger people? Once you answer that question, you will train accordingly to fulfill that need. So your physical attributes should be secondary to what your jiu-jitsu game is. And at the same time, if you reverse that, your jiu-jitsu game will most likely reflect who you are physically as a person. So if you're taller, lankier, you're probably going to need a little bit more flexibility. If you're small and short, your game will most likely pivot around speed. If you are a stocky, a burly person, your game will be a pressure game, which will require more strength. So figure that out and go from there. Question is, what is the most important thing a female could do to increase success against a male when sparring or fighting when they do not have access to a knife or a gun? It's a very important question. While Jiu-Jitsu is made for the smaller person to have a higher success ratio against somebody who is stronger and heavier, it is not a panacea. It is not magic. And the application of Jiu-Jitsu will require some strength. It is very foolish to believe, oh, technique overcomes strength. Sure, but what happens when technique is kind of similar? Okay, so when you're sparring, for example, somebody of a similar rank, that technique differential is not the same as a purple belt to a white belt. So at that point, strength and size plays a bigger factor. How can you try to equalize things a little bit more? If you are a female, I'm assuming most of the sparring matches you're gonna be facing somebody who's stronger and heavier than you. That's just the nature of it. If we look at average body types, and when doing that, it's on you to imprint a faster pace to that game. So anything that slows you down, if you're one of those persons that over relies on closed guard, that's probably not a good idea. If you pull half guard and you lock it right off the bat, while it might work against somebody of your size, when you have somebody who's 100 pounds stronger, 100 pounds heavier, it's going to be a bad thing to get that person on top. So prioritize speed and prioritize, if possible, being on top. If you're caught on the bottom, right away, shrimp, push the pace to get back to your knees, stand up to base, or get back to your feet if that's the case. In order to do that, you got to have cardio. So if you lack in strength in comparison to that person, you better have better cardio, and you better have a faster thinking when it comes to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Again, there's no solution. There are times when you're going to be faced with people that are stronger, better at Jiu-Jitsu, more flexible, faster. That's just life. In that case, take the lesson for the day, ask that person what you can do to improve, and hopefully they'll be able to help you and you come back stronger and better. Matt asks how to strength train and condition for BJJ, applicable strength protocols. Well, that's a topic that's very dear to my heart. I always believe in athleticism as being a key part of being successful as a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu player. Again, while a lot of people will preach the technique overcomes strength, if you can have both and make things as unfair as possible in your favor, it is better. There's a lot to be said about this, but usually when I'm talking about somebody who's already an athlete and coming into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I will tell them to prioritize 5 things. So lift heavy, and when I say lift heavy, I mean basic compound lifts such as squat and deadlift, and high poundages. So you want to be into that rep range, 3 to 1 reps, where you're not going to maximize hypertrophy, because your goal is really not to get bigger and not to get shredded, but to get stronger per pound of weight. So heavier lifts are required. You want to do more of a neuromuscular training. You want to increase recruitment versus increase muscle fiber size. Second, you want to lift explosively. It's important to train that explosiveness in order to get more speed in your execution of your techniques. And the best training for that is definitely the hang clean. So I believe, in my opinion, the hang clean as a lift, it's superior. You don't have to do a clean from the floor because you're not really using that first pull, and you're not competing in any Olympic weightlifting event. So you might as well clean from a hang. And do that frequently, and you can do variations with a bar. You can do it with if you want to do it with something else like a Bulgarian bag, whatever you want to do, dumbbells, kettlebells, but clean. That would be a great fit for that explosive lifting part. Third thing, you got to sprint. When I say that, I don't mean running. I'm meaning like short distance sprints. Again, we're trying to recruit explosiveness. If you're doing 40-yard sprints, that's great. If you want to do every once in a while 100-meter shot, that's great. If you want to do a 25-meter shot, that's fine. Just find what works for you. We're not getting into in and outs of why one is better. I'm just giving you a general idea of what to do. Fourth thing will be to throw things. Okay, so what I mean by that is that get some heavy bags, like any kind of weight, and throw it explosively. Usually you see this done a lot with med balls these days. That's fine. Just make sure it's a heavy enough medicine ball, or it's a long enough throw to really require a lot of explosiveness. And last but not least, number 5, jump. Plyo jumps. So we're talking, it could be a distance jump, but a plyo box jump will do. So again, if you're quickly reviewing it, this is overview. There's obviously a lot of details that I cannot cover there in a simple answer. But lift heavy, lift explosively, sprint/run, right? Jump and throw heavy things. Antonio asks, thoughts about fasting before competition? Short answer on that one, don't. I believe in fasting, intermittent fasting. I think it's the best way to keep weight off. It's also good for your health, as far as I know. And I'm even up for longer fasting periods. But when you're talking about performance right before competition, you want to increase that glycogen storage. So you actually want to be eating a lot of clean carbs prior to that competition, because you will have to draw on those reserves on a match that goes the full length. Say you have in black belt time, you have 10-minute matches, so you're going to need a lot of glycogen reserves to last through those matches and still be able to execute powerful technique. Dustin asks, with the popularity of ADCC, will the Ghee eventually die out? I hope not. I think there is a market right now for Ghee competition. However, I hope that it forces the Ghee sports part of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to evolve. And just as in wrestling, there are constant revisions of rules to make things more exciting for the layperson to watch. I think we need the same for Ghee. Nobody, and I mean nobody, myself included, wants to watch a 10-minute black belt match when there's barely any offensive technique involved. It's just a matter of playing for advantages and wrapping the Ghee around the person until it's really hard for them to move. There's not a whole lot of action. It's boring. Personally, I don't watch sports jiu-jitsu anymore. It's from an entertainment point of view, for me, it's extremely boring. Now, no Ghee, because the pace is faster. It's obviously more exciting. For a beginner to watch, it's easier. You don't have to have a full in-depth understanding of the nuances of what's going on in order to enjoy a good scrap. So I think no Ghee will eventually grow tremendously in relationship to the Ghee, but I think there will be a time and space for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with the Ghee. I just hope that the rules are changed so it's a little bit more exciting for everybody watching. Tell us about the beginning of BJJ scene in Rio in the 90s. Well, I was very blessed to be born in a time and place where I could witness the growth of Jiu-Jitsu and the transformation of Jiu-Jitsu, especially through the 90s. It was a very exciting time. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, for those that do not know, wasn't extremely popular in Brazil in the late 80s and even early 90s. It was considered more of an outcast type of practice. So good people would train, good kids would train in judo, which had a great reputation. It was very big in Brazil for educating and giving discipline to kids, rightfully so. It's a great sport. And Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the time was less of a sport and more of a real martial art. As I grew up in Jiu-Jitsu, so when I started practicing, I started in '89. In the early 90s, it was very common to have open hand slapping practices inside the gym. Something that today, if you put kids through those practices, it would be considered not just immoral but illegal. But I was able to experience that because the goal in Jiu-Jitsu at the time wasn't points or sports competitions, since there were very few competitions per year. The goal was really to give you the best set of tools, realistic tools, to deal with self-defense scenarios and fighting scenarios. So the practice was a little different. With time in the early 90s, like I said, you would have just single-digit number of tournaments per year. And as things grew, the sports part of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu grew with that. And that modified the nature of the martial art, and it turned more into a sport. I hate calling Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu sport because in my heart, it's so much more than that. It's a self-defense oriented martial art. The goal of Jiu-Jitsu, to me, it's not to score points, it's to prepare you for real life confrontation. But the fact is that a lot of people came to Jiu-Jitsu drawn by the exposure from those competitions. So it did a lot of good for our martial art, it did a lot of good for Jiu-Jitsu, and it changed the way that we were seen as Jiu-Jitsu athletes. A Jiu-Jitsu athlete in the early 90s, sometimes it was called a pit boy. Your presence was not welcome in parties because they saw you as a violent person who was always trying to pick a fight. By the end of the 90s, the professionalism in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was so much bigger that it would be easier for athletes to get sponsorships. You would be considered just like a judo athlete, somebody that used martial arts and practiced it for a living. It was a great change, and the number of schools just grew exponentially. And in Rio, and by the late 90s, it was hard to walk a couple of blocks in the south zone of Rio where you wouldn't find a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school. So they were everywhere, and the competition was great, and therefore the number of people training was great, and the evolution of the martial art was great because of the number of man hours put on the mats by those people. So it was a very exciting time. I'm still excited to see what's happening with Jiu-Jitsu, and I hope it goes further. Andrew Fury Sandstrom asks, how did your progress through the belt ranks go? What rank was the most difficult to progress through? So I started as a kid in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so I had to go through kid ranks. So I went through white belt, obviously, to yellow belt, and to orange belt. All of those under my first Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu teacher, which was Pedro Carvalho. After that, I started training with my teacher, Aníbal Braga, and he gave me they promoted me all the way from blue belt to black belt. As far as the most difficult, I never thought about it in that way. I think, some people worry a little too much about what color belt they have around their waist. To me, it was all about performance. To me, it was all about trying to beat as many people inside that training room as I could. And once I ran out of people in that training room, I would look for a different training room with better people and trying to get my ass kicked so I could improve. And so therefore, I was never extremely frustrated with any belt. As far as the belt that gave me more pleasure to be promoted to, I would say without question was the purple belt. The reason being, in Brazil, a lot of times you divide classes and you divide the atmosphere even at the gym in two major groups. What we call graduado, those who have received a degree, is a Portuguese word for it. And graduado means purple belt and above. And não graduado, which is those who don't have a degree, is blue belt and below. So once you make it, that's the big water divider. Once you make it a purple belt, it's a big deal. It's sad for me to see these days a lot of people, just going through promotion so fast. And I think it's going to bite us in the butt when it comes to jiu-jitsu teachers and jiu-jitsu schools, because everybody wants progress. It's a commercially infused system now to promote your students faster and faster. And the more we do that, unfortunately, for those that do it, you're going to cheapen the achievements of prior Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners. When I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, purple belts were gods. You would see all the time salty purple belts where their belt color was just faded to near white, maybe pinkish. And those guys were doing jiu-jitsu for 8 years, and they're still purple belts. And they were not complaining about it. They were like, I can't believe I didn't get promoted to brown belt. They were just destroying the competitive field. Was it fair? Maybe not. There's a balance there between sandbagging and promoting too fast. But the point is, it cannot be something that everybody achieves. Otherwise, it loses value. So if you start telling people that anybody can be a black belt, I don't think that's a good attitude. If you make the sacrifices, if you stick with it, if you go through all the pain and suffering, if you're willing to do what it takes, plus you get lucky and you possess some natural talent to help you, sure, you can do it, but it's not for everyone. If you say it's everybody can get to this level, you start creating a situation where you take the value away from that achievement. It's like saying everybody can be an MD, or everybody can be an astronaut, or whatever classification you want. If you want something to have value, it has to be difficult to achieve. Otherwise, it beats the whole purpose of the whole thing. So my advice to my students is always, don't try to be like anybody, try to beat the other person. So try to defeat that person that's to your right side as you bow out. So those higher rankings than you, just try to create challenges for yourself where you're trying to first not to be defeated by them and then to defeat them eventually. Don't focus on the rank. Don't be one of those people that asks your instructor, whoa, when I'm going to get the next belt level. If you do that to me, man, it's going to be a long time before you see the next stripe or belt, because it shows to me that you do not grasp what this is all about. It is not about what little pretty color sash you have around your waist. It's about how effective you are against the person that's in front of you, and how helpful can you be to the person that's by your side or behind you. Okay, so that's what Jiu-Jitsu is all about. Don't focus on the belt, focus on what's important. Well, guys, thank you for watching. If you have any more questions, we'll try to do that every once in a while. If you haven't yet, subscribe. Press the little, how does it go? Press the little subscribe button and notification bell or whatever the hell that is. Follow us also on our Instagram at MRJJA Rochester or at MRJJA. That's my personal one. And stay strong. Keep on training.